Brothers and sisters, it's great to be with you today. I'm recording this on Tuesday, June the 9th. Today is a great feast in the Anglican Church. It's the feast of St. Columba of Iona. St. Columba is credited with bringing Christianity to Scotland from Ireland in the 6th century. So today is one of those great feast days of the Anglican Church, and I'm glad to be able to address you this day as well. You know, as we make our way now toward the reopening of the church, the pace of activity has really picked up, and our vestry is just doing incredible work to try and get everything in order so that we can invite everybody back to in-person worship and to do it in a way that's very safe, as we can manage it for sure. But you know, as we get ready for this time, I'm reminded a little bit about a theme that shows up many times in Scripture. This theme of something ends, and then there's a period of wilderness, and then there's a new start. And I think that we're kind of in the midst of living out that theme right now as God's people. We see that over and over. Think of a few places where that shows up in Scripture. How about the Exodus? When the Jewish people had spent years and years in slavery in Egypt. And it was painful and it was uncomfortable and there was a lot of suffering, but at least it was predictable. They understood what life was like as slaves. And then God convinces Pharaoh to release his people, and they follow Moses where? But into the wilderness. This period of time when nothing was predictable. In fact, some of the time they wished they could go back to being slaves. At least there, they knew where their food was coming from. They knew what the roof would be over their head tonight, and they knew where they'd get water when they needed it. And in the wilderness, nothing was predictable like that. And then they get to the promised land, and after 40 years of learning to live, wandering in the desert, following Moses, now they're going into a land that God is giving them, and life is changing very, very much for them again. So that's the theme. Think about it with Jesus in the early church as well. The disciples lived with Jesus for 3 years they followed him. That was a big change of life for them to now be following this teaching rabbi, the Messiah, and following him all through Judea and Galilee. And then he dies, rises, and ascends into heaven, and now he's physically not with them. How are they going to adjust as his people to him not being there? That was a whole new time of wilderness for them. In those early days, there was a lot of suffering as the early church had many martyred for the faith. They had both Jews and Romans oppressing them. And then the church starts to grow. Some structures fall into place, and the church begins to feel the blessings of God being spilled out upon them as they had this new start. In many ways, I think that's kind of where we are right now. Aren't we in the middle of something kind of like that? Think of it, in the beginning of March, we were led into this period of wilderness. We didn't know what was ahead. We didn't know how life was going to change. We didn't know how the church scattered was going to continue to be the church. We had never seen anything quite like this. What changes was it going to mean to our daily life, our work? What was it going to mean to our families, right? And now we're getting ready to come back and have a new start. We've got just comfortable with what was going on day to day in quarantine, and now it's opening up and things are about to change again. But that change is now about a new start. And see, anytime God leads his people through that kind of a transition in life, a period of wilderness, it's uncomfortable, it's unwanted. But when we look back later at that wilderness experience, often we see things that we actually are glad that we experienced at that time. We see things that were gained from that period of time. Oh, there were things lost, but there were also some things gained. And I think anytime God leads us that way through the wilderness, it's good for us to step back and just take a few minutes and look at what was it that we gained and lost through that period. The Jews that came through the Exodus, what did they learn? They learned how to trust God for everything. They learned how to follow a leader. They learned how to come together as a people of God. They learned how to depend on one another. So those were things that wilderness taught them. They weren't easy lessons to learn, but they learned them. And they wouldn't want to let those things go as they moved into the promised land. That was going to hold them in good stead for their new start. And so as we prepare to exit this wilderness, I'll ask you to think and to pray about what were the losses and the gains over the last 3 months for you. If you lost certain things, did some of those things prove to not be very important anyway? I watched a whole lot less TV during these days in quarantine, believe it or not, and I don't miss it, and I don't want to pick that back up again. There were other things I gained. I gained more time in prayer, more time in Bible study, more time in nature and the outdoors and being able to exercise. Those were gains, and I don't want to lose those. I don't want to just put those down as we come out of this wilderness time. You know, the prophet Isaiah talked about stability, and when he talked about stability, he always likened it to an oak tree. Something stable and strong and could provide protection from the elements. It was well anchored. He talked about stability in terms of the characteristics of an oak tree. And he said, an oak tree is something that I want to always hold tightly. And so that's my question, is as we come out of this wilderness time, what are the things you want to hold on to tightly? As you go into a new start for our church, a new start though for you personally and for your family. And then what are the things you're happy to let go of and you don't want to pick them up again and just let them go? And so I pray that as God brought you through this wilderness, that it was a time of developing a deeper relationship with Him. And as we go forward, I pray that you would hang on to that relationship, this deeper relationship that you have with Him, because I know it will hold you in good stead as we go forward, all of us, for this new start that God has in mind for us. Talk to you soon, and God bless everyone.